شكرا سيد.
Thank you, Mr. President. Some colleagues in their interventions raised important and pertinent questions, and I am ready to answer these questions after reading my statement if the Presidency allows me to do so. We have sent it to the Security Council for over 8 years. We said that there is an uncontrolled elephant that distorts the political and humanitarian situation or landscape in my country. In order to discredit the government of my country and to launch a smear campaign against it and to demonize it as a prelude to another escalatory scene that would come later, according to their minds. Today, Mr. President, I have understood from the capital that some non-governmental organizations that are operating in the humanitarian field in Syria, including the Denmark Refugee Council, DRC, and the Adventist agency, ADRA, those two organizations, among others, have a problem to transfer money allocated to humanitarian activities in Syria. This problem started in July. So these organizations are trying to find alternatives for the transfer of money. However, such transfers are blocked by mediation banks in Europe and in New York, whether the transfer is in euro or in dollars, which directly affects the programs of these humanitarian organizations and their ability to plan projects and programs, other humanitarian projects and programs for the year. That's an example of the real scene in my country against non-governmental organizations that are Western and international at the same time, European and Americans. However, no one sees this scene or want to see this scene. There is a kind of addiction as to a unilateral scene that they want to see, but the general scene is not advisable here in this council. Anyway, at the outset, I thank the delegations of the states who called for this emergency meeting for their strong commitment in their briefings today to the provisions of international law and the UN Charter, as demonstrated in their strict condemnation of the aggression, occupation, pillaging, theft, which are aggravated and defined, perpetrated by the Turkish regime against my country. We also thank the same delegations for their initiatives and steps taken to uphold the values of the Charter and international law through compelling the Turkish regime to stop supporting terrorism and to stop bringing its Ottoman militias, the new Ottoman militias from Yugur, from Uzbekistan, Turkestan, Chechnya, Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and the Arabs, to have them settled in the Syrian territories adjacent to Turkey after the displacement of Syrian population therefrom, and to carry out a demographic change that reminds us of the Israeli crimes against the Palestinians. We thank the same delegations for standing against the operations by the Turkish regime to transfer thousands of moderate terrorists who are genetically modified but at the same time armed and mercenaries to Libya and to Europe and Africa and other areas. We also thank the same delegations who called for this meeting, for their keenness on enabling the Security Council to shoulder its responsibility in a professional and credible fashion through condemning the U.S. occupation of parts of our territories, including the area of Tanf, where the Rukban camp is located, and for the sponsorship by the U.S. occupation of Magawir Asawra, or the revolution commandos. The violations of this organization are not limited to the population of Rukban, but has reached civilians, unsuspecting civilians in the governorate of Swaida. We also thank the conveners of this meeting for their condemnation of the illegitimate existence of their troops on the Syrian territories, and for relentless demand to compel the tripartite occupation to withdraw its forces and disbanding their militias and their puppet militias, and to compensate for their devastation in terms of pillaging, along with the militias and terrorist organizations, pillaging of oil, gas, wheat, artifacts, and property that belong to Syrians. We thank the conveners of this meeting to adopt or to exercise pressure and active diplomacy to adopt a resolution under Chapter 7 to condemn Israeli attacks against my country, latest of which was from the occupied Syrian Golan. This came through a Turkish or a high-level Turkish-Israeli coordination to introduce Turkish regime troops and military equipment into Idleb through the so-called humanitarian crossings, in order to undermine the efforts of the Syrian state and its allies to end the control by terrorists over Idlib and to normalize life there. And to the President of the Security Council and members of the Council, I would like to say that today, hours ago, there was a meeting in Taftanaz airport near Aleppo between Jabhat al-Nusra and the Turkish troops. Again, between Jabhat al-Nusra, a Security Council designated terrorist or group, and the Turkish troops that occupy a part of our territories. The Turkish troops today, along with Jabhat al-Nusra, took part in an offensive against Nira area in Aleppo. So this information is for you to be evaluated and assessed. We thank the conveners of this meeting for their efforts to unify the Council, to impose the implementation of its resolutions on combating terrorism. There are tens of those resolutions, so to support the efforts of the Syrian state and its allies to combat terrorism and FTFs, and to cleanse our territory of their evil, and to compel member states concerned, especially the European ones, to take back their nationals without delay. We also thank the conveners of this meeting for their unlimited commitment to international law and United Nations resolutions, and their humanitarian keenness or commitment towards the Syrian people demonstrated in their rejection of the unilateral coercive measures and which constitute economic terror and collective punishment. This was boasted about by some delegations here. I also thank the staff of the Secretariat for the close review and follow-up of 900 official letters regarding the so-called crisis in Syria. Mr. President, excuse me for a moment. I thought I am in the Security Council, which, in accordance with the Charter, we entrusted with maintaining international peace and security, but not in the Council where some permanent members, governments, to change or turn into a NATO forum and to incite against my country and to discredit it, and to exercise all types of pressure on the Syrian state, including through hysterically calling for repeated meetings on the situation in my country and requesting the Secretariat to provide numerous reports and briefings to serve their interventionist and aggressive goals. And you have heard, all of you have heard the intervention of the U.S. Permanent Representative when she said that Turkey is a NATO ally. So this is not a Security Council, but rather a council that is being used as a NATO forum. And this is an unacceptable threat to say inside this House that the United States of America protects Turkey against violations of the Charter and international law. My delegation reiterates that attempts by countries to impose the NATO agenda on the Security Council would undermine the credibility of this Council and refute all the pretexts used by some to demonize the Syrian state and to provide political and military cover for the crimes of the members of NATO, including the Turkish regime against my country. Don't you remember, ladies and gentlemen, the declaration by Erdogan on the 5th of September 2012 that he, along with allegiant terrorist organization, would pray in the Umayyad Mosque? Isn't this announcement an indication of prior aggressive intentions and a declaration of war against my country 8 years ago? What does the NATO think? If someone says that he would occupy Turkey and pray in the Blue Mosque in Istanbul, or occupy one of your capitals and pray in your houses of worship, what would be the response of NATO, Mr. President? The fiction we have presented regarding the positions of member states of this council is a legitimate fiction because it's underpinned by our belief in the provisions of the Charter and international law, while their practices and realities are underpinned by undermining the Charter and manipulation of the international law. The Western governments were clear in their pursuit to destroy my country and spread creative chaos, pillage our wealth, and settle their old accounts with us. They clearly pointed out the tools they would use to achieve this goal. The memoirs of the politicians of these states and the WikiLeaks scandals are rich in what would prove our arguments. Therefore, we reiterate that improving the living and humanitarian condition in Syria and achieving the political solution requires, foremost, a reconsideration by aggressive Western states of their policies and to adopt approaches underpinned by international law and the provisions of the Charter, and to put an end to aggression, occupation, compulsion, and investment in terror, and to respect the sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity of the Syrian Arab Republic, and to support our efforts and the efforts of our allies to combat terrorism, because this is the right and the duty that we will spare no effort to fulfill, to liberate Idlib and every part of Syria, as was the case when we liberated the neighborhoods of Homs and east of Aleppo, Ghouta, and east of Syria. Idlib is a Syrian territory, and any illegitimate military presence there will be the responsibility of the state where those which nationals hold its is the responsibility of the state where those nationals come from. Mr. President, with whom do you want to hold the ceasefire? With the entities that you agreed to designate as terrorist groups in this council, with Jabhat al-Nusra, with Hayat Tahrir al-Sham? With whom would you like to hold or reach a ceasefire? But for cannibals, hundreds of whom are on your lists as terrorists, how can we reach an agreement with those, with terrorist organizations that you designated as terrorist organizations?
I invite the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic to come to a conclusion. The normal time is 5 minutes, and I think it's almost 15 minutes now. Thank you very much.
The Russian representative is asking for the floor. The Russian representative.
Yes, the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's a call. It's a point of order. Мы сегодня обсуждаем.
Today we are discussing a matter that is on the situation in Syria that was requested by 3 countries' delegations. This is a situation that directly affects the Syrian Arab Republic, and we do not have an open debate today when 120 members of the United Nations take the floor, and the 5-minute rule is not even a rule, it is a recommendation to be applied. It is the representative of the country who is taking the floor, the situation of which is being discussed in the Security Council, and so it's not right to stop his statement for any artificial reasons. As President of the Security Council, I am sure that you should demonstrate respect to the representative who is making a statement on behalf of the country that is currently being considered by the Security Council. Thank you.
Je remercie le représentant.
I thank the representative of Russia for your statement. I give the floor once again to the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic, but I invite him to conclude his statement as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, the Syrian government and its allies over the past years reached 17 truces or armistices. It's like a ceasefire, 17 ones. Each time, hours after the truce is being violated by militants under instructions or at the instructions of their handlers from Ankara or from somewhere else. And therefore, I raised the question, according to our experience, and after 17 truces, which were all violated, the ceasefire was breached by the cannibals from the other side, who were bombarding Aleppo on a daily basis and killing hundreds or tens of civilians. No one from this council called for an emergency meeting to discuss the bombardment of Aleppo by terrorists. Bombardment of Aleppo by terrorists is acceptable, but by the Syrian army to combat terrorists is impermissible. Anyway, we have opened 3 humanitarian crossings more than 2 months ago for the exit of our nationals, civilians from Idleb to safe areas under the control of the Syrian government. 3 humanitarian corridors, and the Syrian Red Crescent is there, and our Russian allies are there on the ground, and they are watching what is transpiring. But terrorist organizations in Idlib did not allow civilians to leave, and they were killing anyone who attempted to leave. They killed tens of our people in Idlib who were trying to exit Idlib. I don't want to prolong this discussion at your request, Mr. President, but as I told you, if you want to listen to the answer of the questions raised, I'm ready. I thank you.
Je remercie le